Hi everyone, my name is James. I am a solutions consultant with PagerDuty, and I'm going to talk to you for the next 10 minutes or so about webhooks, as you can see on the screen there. So Justin mentioning event-driven automation at the end of that talk with Diego there was quite a nice segue into this. I'll take a look at some of the more basic setup of webhooks in Rundeck, maybe talk about some example use cases, what you might want to be using them. And then I'll do a quick demo as well. Look, I mean, I'm sure this is a topic that you're all probably familiar with. I'm sure most of you are probably using these already. So apologies if it's going over old ground for some of you, but always nice to have a little refresher anyway. So why use webhooks? Well, I think, again, like I said, it's fairly self-explanatory, but just in case you're not aware, why would you want to use webhooks with your Rundeck automation? Well, for first and foremost, it gives you a capability to actually start to trigger your automation externally. So you can automatically fire your Rundeck jobs, remove any of manual triggers that you might have. So that means you can start to fire things from external systems as well. So it gives you the capability to start firing jobs in real time, so you can start instantly reacting to events. Obviously, the knock-on effects of that is it's going to give you improved efficiency. You can start to automate those repetitive tasks. It gives you improved scalability as well, so you can start to handle high volumes of events too. And I think ultimately it gives you flexibility to start integrating Rundeck with other tools, other applications and systems, or even just using Rundeck as that middle layer to integrate two other systems or tools together. And that's one of the use cases that I'm going to look at in the demo in a few minutes. So a couple of example use cases for you. Obviously, there are lots and lots of, ways that you could apply the use of webhooks, but some of the more common ones that we see, and Justin touched on a couple of these just a moment ago, but monitoring and alerting. So the ability to actually start to trigger jobs, whether they are, diagnostic jobs, trying to better understand the problem that's happened, or even attempted remediation in response to monitors and alerts that you have in place. Infrastructure management, so allowing you to do configuration changes based on infrastructure events or automated deployments. Security patching, so similar to your monitoring and alerting, but from a security standpoint, maybe you want to automate your patch deployment in response to security events that you're seeing. And I think one of the most common ones we see is the ability to start doing self-service IT operations. So being able to, off the back of a ticketing system or web form, being able to trigger a job that will automate some kind of IT operation. So whether it's, provisioning user accounts, providing access to resources, or even provisioning infrastructure, that's a really common use case that we see being applied quite a lot. So with that in mind, I'll talk a little bit about the general setup of the webhooks in Rundeck, and then we'll take a look at webhooks in action. So first of all, from a security standpoint, you do have the option to include an authorization header with your webhook request. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's the config screen that you'll see in Rundeck when you set your webhook up. And you can see there's a checkbox there, which I've circled in red, saying, do you want to use an authorization header? So once you check that, you'll be given a value, which you can copy and save somewhere down. You'll only see that the one time. So if you do need to change it, or sorry, if you do need to access it again, you'll need to refresh it and get a new one. And you can see on the right-hand side what that looks like in the actual request. So simple header, authorization, and then the string value that you're given. So you do have the option to make your webhooks a little bit more secure by using those authorization headers. And then the real kind of core bit of config that you're probably going to be interested in is the ability to pass in information from the webhook payload through as options into the jobs that you're firing, or indeed as node filters as well. So you can pass in values through to be used by the jobs that you're triggering, either in the jobs themselves, or, as I said, being able to actually target specific nodes based on the contents of the webhook. So you can see a small example payload that I've got at the top there. It's just a couple of fields. So one field with a nested subfield. And you can see that you can actually start to specify fields within the payload as named options within the job. So if you look at this example here, this is the syntax you would use if you wanted to pass in that subfield through as an option named job option. So dollar curly braces, data.sub1.subfield passing through as a job option. But what's actually quite interesting is you can also just pass in the full payload. So over on the right-hand side there, you can see if you use this syntax with raw, you can actually pass in the full payload, and then you can subsequently do whatever you want to do with that in the job itself. And I'll take a look at that in action in just a second. I think that's a really useful capability. You also have access to context variables as well. So some information that you also have the ability to pass through to the job. So you can see there you get ID, project, sender, and timestamp. So those can obviously be quite useful. And again, you can see the syntax underneath there, passing through a timestamp as an option, in which in this case I've called timestamp. So yeah, you do have those available as well. So what does that look like when you set your webhook up? This is the screen that you'll see. You can see there I've declared a few options in the green box. First of all, passing in the raw payload, then a couple of fields, and then that timestamp as I just went over. So that's what it looks like in reality when you start setting these up. And then the final thing to say on the configuration side is just the response that you get back. You get a couple of fields back in your response, one being the ID of the job that you've triggered, but more useful is the execution ID. So you can actually use that execution ID to check on the progress of the job execution itself. So something worth bearing in mind. Okay, I'll do a very quick demo so you can get a feel for what this looks like. So over on this screen, I have my Rundeck running locally on this machine. And in my webhooks section, I've set up a few different webhooks in here. So I'll just take a look at this one quickly. So this is the same one that we were just looking at on the slide there. So you can see passing in various different fields through here. And if I go over to Postman, you can see I've got a JSON object here. I'm just passing in a couple of fields, going to send that through. Not the most exciting demo yet, but it will get more interesting. You can see there I've got the job ID back and the execution ID. So if we go back to my Rundeck server, go to my dashboard and have a look at my execution, you can see that's the one I just did. And if we take a look at the job here, I won't go through it all, but in this section, I just passed out all the variables through. And you can see in this section here, I passed out all of the different options that I passed through. So I've got the raw payload here, 2 fields, and then the timestamp there. So you can see it all in action. Now, what might be a bit more interesting is actually if we start to use this to do something. So I mentioned earlier on about using Rundeck to be that integration layer between 2 tools, 2 different applications. So what I've set up is a simple job, which is going to take a webhook from application 1. In this case, I'm going to use PagerDuty, and then it's going to use the Jira API to create a Jira ticket based on the information that we get from that PagerDuty webhook. So the webhook itself, very simple. All I'm doing is taking that raw payload, going to do some parsing of that payload before I then send that off to become a Jira ticket. So in PagerDuty, if I go to my webhooks section here, now a lot of applications give you the ability to send webhooks, but they might not necessarily give you the ability to specify the payload of what goes in. So you might be able to add headers, but you wouldn't be able to modify the contents of the payload. So in that scenario, that's really useful to use Rundeck as a middle layer to actually process that, parse it into a structure that you need for the downstream tool, and then send it on. So in this case, all I'm doing is something very simple. I'm saying when an incident is resolved, I'm going to fire a webhook to this URL. And you can see at the bottom, I've got my authorization string in here. One thing to note, you see that I'm using ngrok because I'm running this locally. So I've got ngrok set up to give me a tunnel through to access on my local machine. If I now go and resolve this incident, so this is one that we created earlier, I'm just going to go ahead and resolve that, which will then fire a webhook to that endpoint in Rundeck via ngrok. Now, if you take a look at the job that I've got here, it's really simple. Just have a quick look. All it's doing is taking that raw payload, parsing out the few fields that I actually am interested in, and then using them to pass them through to create a Jira ticket. So here you can see simple script, parsing out 3 fields, title, URL, and the service name from the raw payload, as you can see there, and then actually saving them with a multi-line data capture. And then in the next step, just using another script to simply create a Jira ticket. So using those references to the data capture from the previous step and pushing them through to a downstream system. And if we take a look at the dashboard, you should see that that just executed. And yeah, you can see that fired there, all succeeded. And finally, if I go and have a look at my Jira board, we should see that Jira ticket come through. So nice and simple. You can see the 3 fields that I parsed out in there as well. So just a really simple, quick example of why you might want to start using Rundeck webhooks and integrating different systems together. So just to finish up with, I'm just going to go over a couple of the benefits that you get on the enterprise version of Rundeck with webhooks, because there are a couple of interesting extras that you get access to. So first of all, conditionals. So you within advanced webhooks in the enterprise Rundeck, you get to specify multiple different actions, and each action can have a different target job. And then an action itself can have multiple conditions attached to it. So you can almost think of it like routing your webhook to different jobs based on the context of the payload. So that's really nice. You also get the ability to do batch processing. So you can start to extract lists from the webhook itself and actually process each value in the list as a separate item. So you could, ultimately execute hundreds of jobs from a single webhook request. And then finally, you also get a really nice debugging screen as well. So you get a view into your webhook processing. It can give you a bit of an insight into setting up and troubleshooting your webhooks. So I'm just going to do very quick 30 seconds just to show you what that looks like. I have my enterprise Rundeck version here, and you can see I've got an advanced webhook set up. And if I go to my handler this time, you'll see I've got my actions here. In this case, I've got 2 separate actions. And if we take a look at each of them, you can see this one is calling a job to check the load balancer health status of its target groups. And it's looking at whether the field resource type equals load balancer in the payload. So it's looking at the contents of the payload and checking whether that evaluates to true. And if it does, then it will trigger this job. Second job, doing the same thing, but it's looking at a different value for the same field. In this case, it's looking at whether or not it's an EC2 instance. So you can actually start to route your webhooks accordingly. On this advanced section here, you can see I've specified a key, which is my batch key. So if there's a list there, it's going to process each item separately. And then finally, I have my debug view. So you can see here history of all of my different requests that have come through this webhook. And you can see in the screen here, I've got one of my actions is red because this condition was not satisfied. And one of my actions is green because it was satisfied. My connection seems to have dropped there. Can you still hear me, Justin?
I can hear you just fine. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. I think my connection went a bit funny. Sorry about that. So yeah, you can see one of those actions was not met and the other was. And you can see also I have 2 different events here that I can scroll through and evaluate against because of that batch key.